Segment 3 of our lecture deals with the issue of U.S. public opinion and climate change. This is meant to be a complement to your viewing of Climate of Doubt, the Frontline program from October 2012, which you were assigned prior to class. I think a couple things that are important to keep in mind here. We mentioned in our first session together the issue attention cycle, and this idea was first articulated by Anthony Downs in an article called Up and Down with Ecology, the Issue Attention Cycle from 1972. Now remember, take a problem like acid rain, which we discussed previously. Stage 1 is the pre-problem stage, where the physical impact exists. It's happening, but the public isn't necessarily cued into it. Scientific experts might be, a small number of politicians might be, but typically it's a very small segment of the population that's cued into a particular problem. Stage 2 is the discovery enthusiasm stage, and that's typically triggered by some sort of dramatic focusing event, like an oil spill or something of the sort. That leads to the kind of opportunity for policy innovation. That overlaps with stage 3, which is when people recognize the costs, economic or otherwise, of dealing with a particular problem. This is followed by stage 4, the decline of interest, and then stage 5, the post-problem stage, where the public isn't necessarily tuned into a problem, but potentially instruments that were developed during stage 2 are present in order to deal with the problem. And the problem is never as obscure as it was in stage 1, but it's not quite as high on the public radar as it was at the height of stage 3. I'd also ask you to think again of the policy streams concept. Remember, as we talked about in the case of acid rain, you need to have an available policy instrument. You need to have the public cued in to look at the problem, probably caused by some dramatic focusing event. You also need the political will to get these things done. When these three streams overlap, John Kingdon tells us that a policy window opens that makes policy innovation possible. Some recent polling data, though, suggests that this might be difficult in terms of climate change. Okay, for example, smaller majorities in the U.S. favor government pollution control. And this is just from June 2014. So this says more than 6 in 10 Americans favor setting higher emissions and pollution standards for business and industry and imposing mandatory controls on carbon dioxide, but those are lower than they were in 2007. So you can see that in 2007, 84% of respondents wanted to set higher emissions and pollution standards for business and industry, and 79%, very close behind, imposing mandatory controls on carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gases. That was fairly steady from 2001 to 2007. What have we seen since then? Both of these have declined. You still have a fairly solid majority of 65 and 63%, but it's difficult not to conclude that the economic problems that began in late 2007 have contributed in part to the decline of prioritization of this issue. This is a poll from October 2014. 1 in 4 in the U.S. are solidly skeptical of global warming. Okay? So you have this group of people, the concerned believers, who think climate change is real, want to do something about it. You have the mixed middle here, which they're a little vague on defining. Presumably that's people that generally believe in climate change, but maybe are not as concerned about doing something about it immediately. And then you have the cool skeptics, and that's the focus of this particular slide here. You have about 1 in 4 Americans don't really believe in climate change or don't consider it a priority at all. Okay? And that's grown, which is interesting, from when they started asking this question from 12% to 25%. It's not as high as it was a couple years ago when it was 28%, but you're basically talking a doubling of people who don't believe in climate change or don't want to do anything about it in recent years. If you break down this demographic information, it starts to get a little bit interesting. There seems to be a significant gender issue. For example, among concerned believers, you have 60% of women and 40% are men. So women vastly outnumber men in the category of concerned believers. You have a relatively healthy mix in this middle mixed category, and men vastly outnumber women in terms of the total cool skeptics. Okay? If you look at the age information as well, these seem fairly regularly distributed. But what's interesting here is that people in the 18 to 29-year-old age bracket, which I assume is most of you, only 10% of cool skeptics are 18 to 29 years old. And among concerned believers, only 14% of concerned believers are 65 years old or older. So that's an interesting age difference. We have a gender difference, we have an age difference. In terms of level of education, excuse me, this is interesting. Okay, in terms of the concerned believers, people who have a high school degree or less make up 37% of concerned believers. People with some college, which is you, make up 29% of concerned believers. People with a college degree, 14%, and then people with postgraduate education, meaning a master's or a PhD, or they at least started one of those, they only make up 19% of concerned believers. The cool skeptics, you have 35% of people who are cool skeptics have a high school degree or less. You have 30% have some college, 17% have a college degree, and 18% have some degree of graduate study. So it's interesting, the difference between the concerned believers and the cool skeptics in terms of their level of education is not particularly dramatic. Okay. There is a dramatic difference in terms of partisanship or party affiliation. If you take a look at all the concerned believers, only 18% of them are Republican or lean Republican, 76% are Democrats or lean Democratic. The mixed middle, very interesting. Okay, pretty even split between Democrats and Republicans. The cool skeptics, the vast majority are Republicans, 80%, and only 11% are Democrats or lean Democratic. And you see something very similar with conservative, moderate, liberal. So all this suggests to us the inherent difficulties of dealing with the problem of climate change. And this probably is not surprising to you after watching the video on Frontline that I assigned you. So I'm going to ask you a discussion question here that ties together this information along with what you saw in the video.